Be advised that this show is not for the faint of heart, easily offended, or children of any age. The opinions and information expressed in this podcast are intended for entertainment purposes only. Deviant Robot provides no guarantee as to the accuracy, completeness, currentness, or validity of this content. Like many things in life, don't take it too seriously and stop using if irritation develops.
Hey.
Hello. That was good energy at the beginning. I like that. That was good. Wow. Wonderful stuff. Hello, everybody. I'm Will, as everybody knows, hopefully, on this channel. I am joined today by the marvelous and delightful Dali juggling lessons. And also wait, I've never heard. And the less marvelous and relentlessly German Janosch at the bottom there. Hello, Janosch.
Can't help it. Hey there.
Can't help it. Can't help it. Not even going to try. Not even going to try.
Nope.
So before we get started, a few matters of housekeeping. One is that this weekly podcast hasn't been here for, gosh, I don't even know how many weeks we've missed. But we've also missed a lot of other live streams at the moment. And frankly, it's just too damn hot. It's just too damn hot at the moment to be sat in a hot room with the streaming equipment and the lights on and everything else. So we've just been taking a coolness break for a while, but we will be back to something like more regular content moving forward at some point in the near future. I'm desperately hoping. But for now, I think these things will just be ad hoc. And the ad hoc genesis of this particular stream was a stream that Janosch and Dali and myself, as well as Mark Solomon, did recently. When was that? Was it Thursday? Tuesday. Yeah, right. Tuesday, where we discussed one of Mark Solomon's videos on the Street Epistemology review show over on the Street Epistemology channel, which you can go and check out. But there was an interesting question that was raised, I think, ad hoc. Stephen, that's just excellent work. Excellent work. That is exactly what we're doing. That's what we like to see here. The pun game is already very strong today. So yes, the question that got raised was I forgot exactly. So we were talking about the nature of scripture, and whether or not street epistemologists need to know scripture in order to have effective conversations, how it may or may not help them, And I think it's a really interesting idea, because I can certainly see from my personal perspective that would be something that, were I more of an outsider to street epistemology, I might expect that we should have to know. I might think that maybe I can't become a street epistemologist because I don't know all of the scriptures. I haven't read all of the science. I haven't, and therefore, how could I do this? How could I do this? So I thought it was an interesting conversation, and I was very glad that Janos and Dali here could join me again, so we could sort of have it off. Well, I was going to say offline, but online somewhere else, I think, is probably the right place to frame it. So obviously since Tuesday we've had this sort of thought. So what have you guys thought about this? What do you guys think? So I guess Dali, do you want to start? Just give us your thoughts first.
I'm going to take the pro-knowledge side of this argument.
Okay.
Oh.
How about you,
Okay.
Janos?
Yeah, I'll take the opposite position then.
Okay.
Which is actually my genuine belief that
is that pro-ignorance?
Yeah, more or less. Yeah. Generally speaking, I would say not knowing too much about the belief of your interlocutor helps the SE style conversation. It helps you ask the questions more genuinely, more curiously, the way that they should be asked in SE.
Right. So what's your counter to that? Would you say, Dali? Why do you think more knowledge? Why do you think being pro-knowledge is better, or might be better?
Okay, it's a balance. If you're going for short-term SE, it's important to only receive the information and almost not do anything back. If you're going for longer form, I'm holding my fingers at like 40 minutes or something.
Is that how long 40 minutes is? I've often wondered.
Yeah, but I'm in the US. We use imperial.
Anyway, use freedom units.
Yeah, freedom units. Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't get me started on metric. I'm a metric bigot. And I can't stand dealing with crap. Anyway, separate conversation. If you're talking about short, SE is formulaically not messaging anything back, not bringing anything back from your own information. You're not injecting information into the content, because it's all about their thing. And if they know their thing really well, it works really well just to receive and receive and receive, and just ask the hypothetical questions that are very abstract and could be formulated to almost anything. I think for the longer version, rapport becomes more of the game than Socratic. Knowing the information is a little bit anti-Socratic.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure I would agree with that necessarily, but I think I know why it's certainly easier to operate in a Socratic style if you don't actually know the information. But as in, it would look more Socratic.
What is a man? And we both know what we think is a man. And I say it's a bipedal featherless thing.
Right.
It brings me a plucked chicken. I'm referring to something from back a long time ago, like before you took a break in the podcast. And the thing is, if we both have a clear idea, we're not going to find an accurate definition. Our thing, we're going to be oversimple. I don't know if that's for or against my position, though.
Yeah, I was just wondering that also. Yeah.
It's a question of knowing the terms. I think it's a really good idea for an SEer to be familiar with, say, let me take it out of scripture. Let's say somebody says, my best reason for God is the ontological argument. And you go, ontology? How do I spell that? Then you're going to have a long conversation that is going to take you off the path while they define their term. If you already know, and somebody says, well, now you're confusing epistemology with ontology, and we can say, okay, yes, I understand. I am wanting to talk about why you believe it, not necessarily what is. And it can help. So knowing the terms is good. Knowing more and more behind the terms.
So, I think that's interesting. Yeah, because I think that's why I personally would err on the side of caution here, because to me, it doesn't really matter what I think ontology is or what the ontological argument is. What matters is what my conversation partner thinks it is. And therefore, I think that me having an assumption about what it is. So they say, oh, I think I found the ontological argument persuasive. And I could say, use my internal knowledge of what the ontological argument is and say, oh, okay, interesting. So I then ask questions about my understanding of what it is. Whereas actually, maybe I've made a mistake about what the ontological argument is. Maybe I think it's something different. Or maybe the person I'm speaking to has a different understanding of what the ontological argument is. Maybe their understanding is more nuanced, or maybe they've made a mistake. And it's really important, therefore, that the next move, I think, in a street epistemology conversation would be the same regardless, which is to say, ooh, interesting. Could you explain what you understand the ontological argument to be?
Okay, interesting. I would say, however, let's say that you've never heard of the ontological argument. You ask them, what is the ontological argument? They try and explain it to you. And let's say that they try and explain it the way that you could also read it up on Wikipedia or wherever. But you've never encountered it. You've never read about it. You're gonna need more time to understand it. How does it work? And maybe they're not the best at explaining it. Maybe they find it difficult to explain to someone else.
Which I would find interesting.
Right. But if you've heard of it, if you know what it is, and they explain it to you, and they're not, like I said, not the best explainers. They're not using the correct words, but you know what they're getting at. You have an idea, and maybe you clarify. You ask a question back. They confirm, yeah, that's what I mean. Then you can move on. So having some knowledge may help you in understanding, okay, that is actually what your definition of the ontological argument is.
So in a hypothetical example, if they were to be finding it difficult to explain to you what the actual ontological argument was, and they were saying that this is the position that actually holds up their entire belief system, but they couldn't quite explain it to you, that would be really useful information in the context of an SE conversation, I think. And secondarily, I think that if they were struggling to actually explain it, it would be slightly symptomatic of the fact that they didn't really understand it themselves.
Right. Not necessarily.
Not always symptomatic. I wouldn't say it was.
Yeah, because maybe you're just a little bit slow and you don't understand it, or maybe you're not really speaking the same language. Maybe you're not. Could be you, or it could be them.
I notice that when I'm speaking to people in public, they appear to me to be way less good than average in describing things on the spot or in real time. And I think that's not that they're less than average. It's that most of what I receive is carefully scripted and practiced because I get video. And so anybody compared to that is going to seem halting and not got it.
Yeah, I think that's an important thing to bear in mind, and I think it's a good call. So when people have a context, they are in any given context, your mental models are going to be responding to the present context. So if you're in church trying to remember scripture, you'll probably have a better time of it than if you are on a basketball court trying to remember scripture. And that's just because you're in an environment where those triggers are invoking the right mental models for that present conversation. It's why you can probably explain something that in your work, you could probably explain something quite technical to a fellow colleague, but then when you're outside and you try and explain it to somebody, it's almost like you've forgotten what it is, and it takes you a while to sort of rebuild that description. So I think when if you're interviewing somebody who's sort of jogging in the park with a dog and thinking about the shopping that they're going to do later on, or whether or not they've paid their gas bill, and you suddenly challenge their theological or deeply held positions on something, their mental models are not going to be ordered, and so therefore their ability to muster and summon those ideas is not necessarily going to be reflective of their true comprehension of those ideas. So I think yes, empathy for the fact that they might just be flustered a little bit and be unable to explain it to you clearly, but at the same time, I think that that's an important place for the conversation to dwell. If they really think that the ontological argument is still a very important or the most important reason for them believing in this belief, for example, then if they're having difficulty explaining what it really is, I think that it's the job of the street epistemologists to help them explain it better, as in to make them feel relaxed and to make them feel comfortable and sort of to articulate why it is so convincing to them. And I think that would be really useful. What wouldn't be useful is me having a pre-packaged understanding of what the ontological argument is and applying it in order to as an expediency. I think that would be that would skip important steps, I think. Yeah.
So maybe for people who don't have that much experience with street epistemology and who have to get used to following the steps and actually asking for definitions, even when you think you know what they're talking about, even if you have an understanding of these terms, maybe then having as little knowledge as possible about the claim is preferable. While for someone who has enough experience that they ask for definitions anyway, maybe it's not that much of a problem if you know more about the claim.
And I think that's really good, because I mean, it's certainly one of the things I think street epistemology has brought to my attention, and that I genuinely value from practicing SE and talking to you guys is that just brute simplicity and elegance and effectiveness of just asking people to explain what they mean, especially when it's when they're talking about terms that I think I already understand. It is just so powerful, and it's powerful because you don't want to work on a misunderstanding or with models that are not aligned, but it's also really, really powerful because maybe one or both of you have made a mistake about your assumptions about what this is, and then through the explanation you clarify, and you're therefore having a better conversation, much more effective conversation. So I think, but that's interesting, isn't it? So if you don't know anything, you'll be a good street epistemologist because your curiosity will drive your right questions. And then the more experienced you get, the better you get at pretending that you don't know anything, so that you can ask the right questions anyway. I quite like that.
And it's sort of like suspending your information in order to not push into the conversation. It's not that I have to pretend like I don't know or make up that I actually don't know it.
Feigning ignorance is not the right thing.
Feigning ignorance is not the point.
Agreed,
like if somebody brings, say, Pascal's wager to me, and they spend 4 minutes telling me who Pascal was, and 5 minutes telling me about how bad hell is. And then when I reflect it back, I say, well, there's this game theory thing, because big win, big loss, you can multiply that against the odds, and almost any odds qualify. And they didn't even really put that in. They kind of only hinted at it. But that's the part that we need to talk about. So when I'm reflecting back and summarizing, if I have some knowledge to fill it in, one, I won't make silly mistakes. And the other is my summary might be better than their communication.
Yeah, you want to, I mean,
and
that
if
would
they
be
agree and think it's good, then we're good.
Exactly, and that would be an example of steelmanning, right? Taking their argument and making it a better version of it.
Yes,
and
I can
you can
steelman
only
it back better if I know it. That's the summary. Thank you for that.
Yeah, no, that's great. So I that is, but that's only applicable if you can be confident that not only do they agree that that's a fair reprisal and summarization of your position, of their position,
you need to go through that step and
they
ask.
really do understand it. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. You have to pose it as a question and not assume because they hinted at it, assume that that's what they mean and just base the rest, like your next questions on that assumption.
I can say what I think I understood from you and about that thing is this. Does that match with what you're saying? So I can bring in a little bit of what I've got. Yeah. And to some degree, it's almost just like knowing the terms of some jargon thing.
Yeah. And just one thing about this feigning ignorance or pretending you don't know, which, like, if someone found out you ask these questions, you ask about the definitions of the terms, and then they find out, well, you know all the terms. Maybe you've spent hours researching this. Why did you ask me that? I think the simple answer is because I wanted to make sure that we're talking about the same thing, that we agree on the definitions. And I think that's what's important. I didn't pretend like I didn't know. I just asked you not because I didn't know. I asked you because I wanted to make sure that we have a the same understanding of the terms, and I think that solves it. That therefore it's never dishonest or anything. It's just curious.
I've seen Anthony do this very well. He says something on, I think I know what that means, but could you explain that to me?
Yeah.
Because and that I think sets the right balance of not feigning ignorance at all, saying, yeah, I'm familiar with this idea, but I'd like you to explain it to me just to make sure we're on the same page.
Right.
I think that's perfect, because I have seen definitely street epistemology videos where somebody's brought up an old chestnut of an argument, and they've sort of feigned as if this is the first they've ever heard of it, and then sort of pondered it as if in deep contemplation, and then sort of given the classic retort. And I think that maybe in the moment that might feel like it's a useful affectation, but I worry that this person's going to find their YouTube channel and see that they've been talking about this already 1,000 times before, and it's going to feel disingenuous, and that's a dangerous thing. But it's totally unnecessary, and that's the worst part of it. I think that you can say, I think I know what that means. Let me can I get you to clarify, because that's just opens the door, I think.
Yeah, I to avoid feigning ignorance, I actually claim too much knowledge, in that I say, for that term, I've heard multiple definitions. I want to only have your definition in mind. I want to forget what I think it means and just hear what you mean.
Yes,
I'm not arguing against somebody behind my shoulder.
So a word like faith, for example, that comes up quite a lot. People can talk about faith. That's not a particularly technical term, but it's also a term that I think many people will use. Well, it has various different definitions, right? So some people use it as a synonym for hope. Some people use it as a synonym for belief. Some people might use it as something entirely different. And so,
trust.
Sorry.
Trust.
Oh yes, trust.
Yeah.
That's a great one.
And most importantly, they may use different definitions in different parts of the conversation.
Yes.
They will equate the things, concepts that are different, but use the same word, faith, for it. And therefore, like, for example, I have faith in God. Do you not have faith that your spouse is faithful to you?
Yes, this is one of the most important, I think, from an SE perspective. It's one of the most important fallacies. It's an informal fallacy called an equivocation fallacy, and it allows you to say the following completely seemingly sound syllogism, which would be, a ham sandwich is better than nothing. Nothing is better than the eternal goodness and happiness of all things. Therefore, a ham sandwich is better than the eternal happiness of all things. And that syllogism seems like it makes sense. GJW?
David John Wellman. He had a video.
Oh, is that his?
With that quote earlier this week.
Oh, really?
Oh,
okay. Excellent.
You wanted to pretend that you were the one who came up with it, William?
No,
Seriously?
no. I've heard that. I've heard that one years ago, and I remember I loved it so much because I reread it.
Yeah,
because I reread it. When I came across it, I'm not sure. I think it might have been AC Grayling's book. I can't remember which one it was, but I think it might have been one of his that mentions it. And I think actually also Bertrand Russell mentions a similar syllogistic problem with Socrates. But anyway, it's an equivocation fallacy, and the reason is that for this particular example, that nothing in one sense means the absence of anything, and in the other instance, it means no single thing. There's no thing available. And it's a very subtle difference, but then when you read it back, you realize that the word nothing, even though it's the same word and it's the same sort of conceptual meaning, is doing two very different jobs in this sentence, in this expression. And I think when people use faith, for example, they can be making an equivocation fallacy by using faith in one way. So I have faith that there is a God, and it's my faith that keeps me going. Well, those seem like they're very different types of faith, right? And God strengthens my faith, or something like that, or and it seems like in this instance they're using the word faith in many different ways, and maybe themselves are not noticing it. They may really be thinking that the ham sandwich is better than the absolute maximum possible happiness for all people, and so it's a really important one to notice and call out if you can, for sure. Yeah. So there's another point to this here, I think, which is that in some ways, I think that there's a danger that if you're injecting knowledge, your experience and understanding of something into the conversation, do you guys feel like that might not, in some ways, you're running the risk of making the other person feel not up to the conversation with you? As in, I've seen this before, but when people are very articulate, the conversation partner who may be less confident starts to sort of withdraw from the conversation a little bit because they feel that they're suddenly, they thought they were in a coffee shop and now they're having a lecture from a philosophy professor, and that they're not really, that wasn't the game that we were trying to be playing right now, so they just start to back away slowly.
If I bring up words like equivocation,
right, equivocation,
it's
yeah,
enough.
absolutely.
I mean, just bringing in large polysyllabic words that have jargon inferences is enough to drop rapport.
Yep, it totally is. Yeah.
And when you use, like, even just pseudo epistemology as a word, I think usually you have to explain what epistemology is,
yes,
or at least to many people, and then to do that in a way that doesn't come off as condescending or patronizing is a challenge. So if you use these kinds of words, then you have to find a way to explain what they mean in a way that doesn't seem like lecturing, but just like more like, I agree that it's kind of a complicated word. Like I'm not using it to sound intelligent. I'm using it because I have to in this instance, and now let's just
because we're stuck with this name, and
right,
it is really unfortunate that many SE conversations on the street especially will need to start like that. I have a hobby that I'm practicing, street epistemology. Don't run away, it's okay, no, it's fine, no, come back, it's not that bad. Let me explain this word to you.
Or
I can do.
Yes. Or in case of many Germans who do it, I have this hobby, it's called it's this conversational technique. It's a bit of a, it just
doesn't translate. What is the German?
Well, you can translate it like street and epistemology. Yes. That would be Straßenepistemologie. But that doesn't really work.
Okay.
So we found a German term. We called it Sokratischer Weg, Socratic path.
Nice.
So now it's easier to pronounce.
It does sound like a cult, though. I mean, it's vague enough to sound like, well, that sounds like okay.
Well,
yeah,
something
introducing Socrates is just as heavy a burden.
Don't you think that's appropriate?
Epistemology. To introduce Socrates?
To imply that it's a cult?
Oh.
I don't think
we can have a podcast just on this one. It really. Where's the control of street epistemology? Some inquiring people want to know who's in charge of this place. Who's our authority? Who do we believe?
It's a good question. They're
all
good questions.
What I found interesting is that I grew up basically without religion. I've never believed in a god. But then, of course, I had religious education in school. Then I met friends who were religious. Some of them very evangelical Christians, really, really into it. Everything was about Jesus and God. And I started wondering what this all was, why people would believe such a thing, and how it seemed so strange to me that people would believe this. And the contradictions and the inconsistencies seemed so obvious to me that I couldn't wrap my mind around it. So I started researching, and then there was a phase where I would read about religion, and then about these God proofs and their counter arguments, and then I would go to my friend and go. I would think, oh, now I've learned something about it. I know the counter argument. Now I will present that to him, and now he will see that it's
that will
silly.
fix the problem.
That'll fix it. And right. And every single time I would discover something new, something that just makes it obvious that this can't be true, I would go to him and start debating with him. And for some reason, it never worked. And I think that was, in that situation, that's what I was doing. I was collecting new information that wasn't relevant, and I injected this knowledge that I gained into the conversation, and it was just, there was no use. He wasn't interested in talking about that because that was not the reason why he believed in it.
Yeah.
And so I think
I
that's
know hundreds of things about the Bible that are wrong, and I don't bring them up in an SE conversation.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's why this is kind of the opposite, because suddenly you try to keep all of that out of the conversation. Before, I try to collect as much as possible, know as much as possible. And then also, I think Daniel Ray said it shows respect when you know scripture. And I think that doesn't.
I don't agree with that at all. If you come up to me and say I'm a member of this religion X, and I say I've never heard of that. It's really interesting. Like, can you tell me about that? Like, the fact that I don't know that person's scriptures or even maybe never heard of it is not a disrespectful act on my part. To be disrespectful, I would have to willfully been insulting to him, having known that or something. You know, ignorance is not a disrespectful act.
Sure.
And I think that, so go.
Maybe you could argue if you said, yes, I've heard of that and never really read up on it because I thought it didn't make any sense to me. I was not interested. I heard about it. I wasn't interested. That could come across as disrespectful. Maybe.
I think comparing that disrespectful is the opposite of respectful without a big gulf in the middle. And I think we're finding ourselves in the middle if we don't have any knowledge. And it's respectful if we understand a little bit about, the more I know about a religion. Like 2 years ago, I knew hardly anything about the LDS church. And now I know quite a bit more about the LDS church. And so when I speak to Mormons, I gain rapport and respect by knowing which things they honor and why.
Yeah. I think there's an expression which is an Englishman should never be insulting or rude accidentally. And I think that's important here, because I think that if I do not know about your religion and your church, or if I've heard of it but not committed my life to researching it in the way that you have, I don't think I'm being disrespectful to you. You could argue that I'm being disrespectful to the religion, because almost all religious ideas, for example, will demand some level of respect. Once you're introduced to the idea, you must therefore follow through and continue to read and commit yourself to it. That's the demand that it makes. And by rejecting that demand, of course, you're rejecting the religion implicitly. And so in that sense, you could say
it won't have anything to do with scripture. I'm completely not interested because I don't, for whatever reason. The most recent common one I would be because I don't give it any weight. But
I'm not convinced. I'm not convinced of its. I'm not convinced of its truth, and therefore I'm not convinced of the utility of committing my time to researching it. And I think there are so many religions out there, right? There are so many different religions, and if, in order to be able to interact with anybody from these religions, if we had to commit a certain level of time to researching each of them, I think that would just be a lifetime's worth of effort just to have conversations with people.
Sure.
However,
or physics for the same.
Sure.
If interestingly, if I met an astrophysicist, and he was explaining he's interested in deep field astrophysics, and I'm like, great, that sounds. I've no idea what that is, or haven't, he could just be as insulted. Why would he not feel insulted on behalf of physics? That's an interesting question. Why do I not need to have a PhD?
Farther SEing a physicist than somebody who doesn't know anything about physics. I just will.
I would certainly enjoy SEing a claim in physics, but I don't even think we're talking about SE at this point. We're just talking about the burden of knowing somebody else's. I want to say culture, but it doesn't feel like the right word, right? So a person who happens to be a Muslim, or happens to be a Christian, or happens to be a Sikh or a Hindu, these people have got a rich textual, scriptural heritage. And there cannot be a burden on me to have been familiarized myself with all of it, just as there cannot be a burden on me to familiarize myself with all of the necessary prerequisites to understanding the astrophysics that my friend seems to be studying.
However, I would say, when you tell a physicist, something that I say or do might be disrespectful towards, I don't know, the field of physics, but that's not just being disrespectful towards you.
Right. Pluto's a planet. That's an end to it. That's just deal with it, mate. Deal with it.
The physicist might be better able to understand the difference than someone who believes in a religion, because many people who are really into religion and are like strong believers will not see the difference between disrespecting their religion and disrespecting them.
100%. Yes, that's it. That's the key difference, is that for a religious person, it's not just a set of ideas that you're not familiarizing yourself, but a culture, an identity. And actually, by not embracing it, you're also implicitly rejecting it, which means you're rejecting their culture and identity. So it automatically, it's already a loaded gun, right? Ready to go off. And we've just met at this point. It's already sitting there. Right. And so that's quite. So I would strongly reject this idea that it's disrespectful not to be familiar with the scriptures. And at the end of the day, I know plenty of people who have strong religious beliefs that don't agree about which scriptures are important, that disagree about the nature of them, that aren't familiar with all of it, that have different resolutions of commitment to the entire pantheon of belief. And so it's almost, I think Christopher Hitchens made this point very well when he was doing his book tour for the charmingly titled God Is Not Great. He said, one of the things he'd come to realize after doing the book tour and going around the Bible Belt of America is that if he was going to, do this properly, he'd have to write a book for every single person he met, because the level of different perspectives and views. The moment you say, God, here's the reason why God never did X, you'll get somebody popping up and saying, well, I never believed God did X. That's obviously not true, but this other thing is true. And then you say, okay, well, you address this, but then this other person really does believe that God did X. So now you've got to write a book for everybody, because even though they may sit under an umbrella term like Christian or Muslim or Sikh or Hindu, the truth is that you don't really know what they believe until you actually ask the individual. And that's, I think, a very core part of what street epistemology is about, is having a conversation with another human being and say, hey, you think something that sounds interesting, can we explore that thought together? That's what we're doing. And it sort of doesn't matter what the thought is, and it sort of doesn't matter what my view of it is. What the whole purpose of it is to encourage somebody else to do that reflection. So yeah, I think that's why I love SE. I think it's good because it's about the other person and not about what I know. And I think usefully, this removes a barrier for entry, as we were starting to talk about at the beginning, because I think, honestly, if we felt that we had to have this burden of knowing all of these religious texts and all of these arguments when we go into it, I think we would never be able to be fully ready. We'd never have that conversation. We'd never start, because you can never be done with that work.
I want to hear your lists. Maybe it's a list we make up all together of prerequisites for SE. I think nobody here is going to say, extensive knowledge of general religious scriptures.
Empathy is the only one I can think of.
Knowledge of anything except for the method of street epistemology.
Okay.
Should not be
method of street epistemology. I also want fluency in the local language.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. I don't know that you'd have to be fluent in the local language to be able to do street epistemology. I think it would be beneficial, but I don't think it's a prerequisite. I think you could look at some of the brilliant. I'm going to go to my classic go-to example in this space. Like Reed asking Tia is faith a good reason a way to come to knowledge? Like that, he repeating that question, or even just sometimes asking people for what they know, the definitions of their words, can cause people to have that really important reflection moment where they think, actually, what does that mean? What do I mean by faith? What do I mean by Christian? What do I mean by God? And so I'm not sure necessarily that being very articulate and very fluent in the language is important.
I really like what Gene is saying. So much in conversation, the interlocutor requires a certain level of knowledge and understanding before they will engage with you. If I'm talking to a rocket scientist, I will get 3 minutes of their time if my first question is, so what are you pushing against? And I'll get an hour of their time if I mention Tsiolkovsky. Okay, don't have to look that up. It's not important. I was name dropping. The point being is, it doesn't have to be about respect, but it is about rapport. If you have a common interest.
Empathy, I think, is the key consideration, sure. and I think that's the only prerequisite. Well, at least certainly the only one I can think of at the moment. But like, if you really want to have empathy for the other person, I think if you don't have empathy, you can go through something that would look like street epistemology, but I don't really think you'll be doing that. I think that providing you've got sufficient empathy and are genuinely willing to have the conversation, I mean, honesty is another thing. Perhaps I think dishonesty would stop it being street epistemology, even if you were going through the motions. So I think empathy and honesty are the key requirements, and anything over and above that, I think, can add to it. So I think language fluency, I think, is useful. So that's not going to hurt you. But I would also, as we already discovered, there was a lady who did a talk about science communication. She was talking about the idea of spatial and temporal. So scientists will talk about spatial temporal distortions, for example, where she just said, well, why don't we just say space and time? Because people know what those words mean, and they're basically the exact same word. It's just that you're framing it in a way that suddenly becomes unfamiliar to outsiders and making it just a tiny little bit harder for people to understand what you're saying. And I think that this happens a lot. Is we can tend to, when we have a wider array of words that are available to us, we can end up relying upon those in a way that excludes others unintentionally. So street epistemology, for example.
I mean, I think what we can agree on is that we need a common language that we can use to communicate, and there is probably some threshold where it becomes just ineffective if you don't speak it well enough, fluently enough, and then if you use too many difficult words, and then of course there's another threshold. So there's probably some sweet spot somewhere. But I was wondering about the part about the rocket scientist. If I don't know anything about what he's talking about, but he's passionate about it, and he has a strong belief, and I want to understand the belief, and I want to understand his reasons why he believes that. I've had a similar conversation with a physicist about something about the universe, and I wasn't. I read the claim. I had no idea what it meant. I had the conversation. I think it really depends on the other person. Some people, when there is a child who really wants to understand rocket science and is really enthusiastic and curious about it, some people will gladly spend an hour explaining everything to them as best as they can. Others will think, not worth my time. That's too low level. I don't want to talk about that on that level.
The first one we can all read. The second one is harder. Right.
And if I don't know anything, but I approach the person with the curiosity, I really want to understand it. Can you please? I'm doing my best here. I want to know. I want to understand. That is usually a big motivator. Not for everyone. Some people will just not be interested, but for many people, that will be sufficient. and for them to have more knowledge about the topic is not really an important factor, I would argue.
So Einstein famously said, if you really understand something, you should be able to explain it to your grandmother. And I think that's probably not, as almost all of these great quotes are almost certainly misattributed to him. But anyway, it's said that he said it. But I think it's a good guiding principle anyway. I think if you really do understand something, you should be able to find a way of explaining it to somebody who's completely inexperienced with the topic. And therein lies the challenge, actually, is that actually oftentimes we use language and tools, and we use the tools that are the ideas packed into language. And we're using them because we've learned to use them, but we haven't yet really learned to understand them. And you can use a tool without really properly understanding it. You can put an equation and you say this equation's. Sorry, say again, Dali.
You drove here in one.
I drove here in a tool that I don't probably in a car. You mean? Yeah. I don't drive, so that was totally lost on me. But yes, I'm with you. You can use a really complicated mathematical equation, and you could just look at it and think, I have no idea how this works. Like, I have no idea how somebody derived this and has proven that it works. But I know that if I feed these numbers in one end and I get a reliable answer out the other end, that other people are telling me is always going to be accurate, and I will just have to trust that works. So you can use tools without knowing how they work. I think this interesting problem of unpacking how you explain something to somebody in the simplest possible form is actually a skill that needs to be worked on. Breaking things down and using simple language and simple terms and not conflating things, I think it speaks against a certain characteristic or a certain tendency, I think, where people start to understand things more. They try to use more complicated language. They try to use more nuanced and esoteric examples. Because to do so sort of helps signify their knowledge. It's a way of celebrating their knowledge, but it's also a way of sort of acknowledging with the people around them that they know these things and they have this sort of capability. But actually really, really being confident in knowing what you know allows you to, I think, break it down into the simplest possible form. And I think being able to do so is a skill that's really, really worth practicing. And, there is a problem with compounded complexity. So you were talking about the physics example, right? You're trying to understand something and you're trying to get them to break it down into the sort of simplest possible idea, right? But maybe the actual concept that's being described is one that actually, depends upon an awful lot of, like, in order to break it down to a place where you understand it, there's so many things that you need to build on top of that you just don't have, that it's literally going to just have to be an argument from authority. And he's going to say, right, this is just this number that you can use to do this. Like, don't ask me about that. That's a whole other thing, right? And here's this other thing that you aren't going to understand, but like, let me just tell you now that this is going to be, always telling you one or the other of these two things, and so you're going to be given these examples. And so basically you're not really being able to construct a model for how this person has understood what they've understood, but you might be able to maybe get the machinery in place sufficiently that you could sort of see a bit of the equation working and a bit of the cogs turning and things. And that can be useful, I think, but it does miss an awful lot of nuance. And I think in a street epistemology context, and this is a claim that we could perhaps explore because I've been talking too long already. This is a claim that we might want to think about, is I have a view that I suspect I might be disagreed with here, that if somebody is genuinely an expert in a field, street epistemology may be less effective in conversation with them. And my reasoning for this before the bulls charge is that essentially street epistemology, I think, is designed to encourage people to reflect. And if somebody has spent a lifetime reflecting on a particular topic, I think it would be surprising to me if somebody entirely new is entering the foray and is really able to make induce that reflection in somebody. And this could be true of a physicist, but it could also be true of somebody who has spent a lifetime as a Christian studying Christian theology. I think it's not a bug of street epistemology that it would be less effective in inducing reflection in people like this. I think it's just a nature of the mechanism, and I don't think it's a problem. Go ahead. Sorry.
It would be less effective in inducing reflection into the IL.
Yes.
But it will be more effective inducing reflection in the interviewer.
Yeah, and I've made
that's a feature, not a bug.
I've made this
with a chapter 7 person. I'm there to learn.
So I've made this distinction that personally, for me, my definition of SE, or what I look to do for SE, has got nothing to do whether I learn or not. I may enjoy the interaction and I may learn something, but that's a very much a secondary consequence to the intention of my conversation, which is to encourage the person I'm speaking to reflect on something. So I would say that it's perfectly likely that you'll have a conversation with an intelligent individual who's very experienced in their field, and that you'd get something out of it. It's just I would suggest that the normal tools of street epistemology are very effective in having conversations with sort of people that haven't really spent that time reflecting on it. I mean, often actually one of the things that's really great about SE is it just gives people a moment's pause to think about it. If it does nothing else, that's useful. Hey, take a moment from this day, stand in front of a total stranger, and let's have a think about something that's really important to you, just for a moment. And if that's all it ever did, that would be great. But it can be much more effective than that, and be more profound, as have a more profound impact. But I think the fact that it's less likely to, the more the person has actually honestly and truly meaningfully reflected. I think that's not a problem. I think the fact that these tools in the general that can be used en masse, as it were, might not be always able to induce the same level of efficacy in sort of when confronted with different levels of people's personal reflections.
That means it's working. Somebody who is
Right.
more of an expert isn't given nearly as much of a boost in becoming an expert, but it will take somebody who's an amateur and move them up toward being an expert.
Right. I think it really depends on the kind of reflection that they have done in the past. And for example, if someone interviewed me on a belief that I have using SE, and then did it again, or someone else did it again the next day, and so on, like for 2 weeks straight, every single day someone interviews me on this particular belief, it's likely that toward the end of those 2 weeks, there will not be as much aporia, not that many new ideas and thoughts that I discover as at the beginning. Because if that was the case, like the
progress wasn't made from day one. Yeah.
Right. What is it? What is this doing? Why? But then again, if someone is an expert, what does it really mean to be an expert? Sometimes that just means walking the beaten track, the beaten path, and always thinking around certain questions, or having in mind already having this answer in place. But sometimes if you look at it from a different perspective, suddenly you discover, oh, wow, that is an aspect that I've never really considered. And
this is that movie trope, though, isn't it? This is the movie trope where basically the genius level scientist is having a problem solving this insane problem with physics, and some idiot sort of stumbles in and spills the tea, and in the process of mopping it up, he goes, "Oh my god, I've solved quantum physics! Now we've fixed everything."
Yeah.
This is that moment. I do want to make just very quickly a distinction, though, between. It doesn't mean it's never effective. You can never have an effective. It's just less likely. That's all my only.
It's less likely, and it's especially less likely if the kind of reflection that they have been doing in the past has always been asking these questions. How do I falsify this? Right. I want to find the best way to prove that I'm wrong about this, and that's the scientific method.
Yeah.
And if they're really applying the scientific method, if they're really looking for ways to falsify their belief, then yes, I agree, it will be less effective to do SE on that belief with them.
Even if that belief isn't true.
Right. Yeah. Even if that belief isn't true. But in some cases, expert can just mean that they have collected knowledge, that they can just talk to you for 2 hours without stopping and preach to you. And
yes.
There's two kinds of expert that I want to distinguish here. Expert in the actual topic, like the guy who might fix my car, and expert in communicating the topic to other people, like the guy who taught him at the technical college.
Yes.
And what we're working on is the communication component. we're not actually helping you get more expert on the thing.
True. Yeah.
Now,
Well,
you might go do study, there might be feedback thing, but we're not bringing anything to make you better at fixing the car.
No, yes, we are. We absolutely are.
Tell me about that.
yeah,
Whoa.
I would agree,
Good, I get to
Janos. I
listen to
think we
Janos.
might be. I like this though.
Yeah, like if someone has, can I come up with a good example? If someone is an expert on doing stuff and has always done something a certain way, and it's always worked, and they believe that's the way you have to do it, that's the way it works, and now you communicate with them, and they discover it doesn't matter. It doesn't make any difference if I use this screw or that screw, if I use that or this or that screwdriver, or if I put in what, I don't have a good example right now, but
No,
I've only ever tried this. I've never even tried doing it another way, and I always thought this was the only right way. But now I've discovered that doesn't matter.
So listening to communicating your idea to somebody who really wants to understand all the details might help you find superstitions that you've inserted into your process that are unnecessary.
Superstitions, or
maybe
any other
superstitions
fallacy,
term.
and any kind of fallacy, any kind of false assumption, any kind of false belief.
Yeah, sorry, I think I'm referencing a superstition as B.F. Skinner would define it, like any behavior that doesn't lead toward the end that you keep going with.
Sure.
Sorry, I think that's more jargony than usually is used.
No, that's fine. I have a prescient, not prescient, but I have an example. There was a YouTube video I was watching teaching us how to make hash browns, and they were talking about the recipe, and they were saying that the current wisdom is always to parboil the potatoes before you shred them, and then you cool them in cold water. But he said that there's no difference between. He said this is what everybody will tell you everywhere. And he said, so he made 2 sets, one parboiled, one not parboiled. And he said it makes absolutely no difference to the taste and texture at the end of it. And so that would be a good example of this, that, this is it's a very simple thing. It doesn't have to be a complex thing like a belief in a God or that the earth is flat or anything similar. Like it could just be a very simple thing. It's like, why do you think that they needed to be parboiled? Well, the recipe said, okay, what, has there ever been a recipe that's been wrong about something? Have you ever changed a recipe and improved upon the end product? That goes kind of, so I completely agree, actually, that I think this would be a great way that SE could help you make the car better. Gentlemen, if you would kindly do me a favor, I'm going to put my radio headphones on and wander downstairs. I can hear you continue to talk.
Great. I need to
get some more water.
It's hard to get rid of. So when I'm singing in choirs, sometimes I will find people that have learned to sing particular vowels and particular notes with particular facial expressions. And it turns out to be very difficult for them to learn to hit the note without moving their eyebrows. So if the choir director wants everybody to have a particular look on their face, some people find it very difficult to learn past an associative action that they've done because they've tuned their eyebrows to the note.
So that's muscle memory, right?
Yeah, it's a muscle memory thing. And if they don't do that, they're not able to hit the pitch right sometimes. So they have to relearn a new way to sing a note.
Right.
And those can be really, it's not even like a logical superstition. It's a practice. It's
right. Yeah.
It's something you learn at the level of juggling.
I just wonder, is that a belief?
No.
Probably not, right? Yeah. It's just
learned
practice. Behavior.
Low belief.
Yeah.
Sometimes they will say, I don't believe that I can hit that note unless I do the thing.
Or they will say, I don't believe I'm making that facial expression while I'm hitting that note.
That I bet that could happen.
Yeah.
That I almost think I remember that, but now you've implanted a memory in me, so I can't tell.
Yeah. I like what Quality Questions wrote, the comment about rubber duck programming, explaining every line of code to rubber duck, explaining its purpose so you can make sure there's no bugs.
Yeah. I used a brick wall.
Okay.
And then,
yeah.
and then if I was asking a partner, would you be a brick wall for me? Which actually meant they were supposed to poke a little harder than a brick wall.
And apparently, like, there's this little story behind that. Supposedly, there was this programmer who would always go to his boss and explain to him what, like, something wasn't working, and he was trying to get advice, and then he would talk and talk and talk, and after a while leave his boss's office and keep coding and solve the problem, and his boss hasn't even said a single word. And then after a while, they decided maybe that's not the best use of the boss's time, so he put a little rubber duck on his monitor, and then next time he would first explain the problem to his rubber duck, and if the rubber duck could solve it, then he wouldn't have to talk to his boss. And just, I like the story behind that. But yeah,
I would frequently be sitting there coding away on what is essentially an impossible problem. Nothing was working. The whole thing's on fire. It's all completely makes no sense. The machine is being willfully irrational at this point. I call my friend over and say, look at this. Look, see what I'm doing, and see how willfully it's disregarding my direct orders. It shouldn't be doing this. It's not me. It's the machine. Go away. Hang on. It's fine. No, I'm fine. And it's brilliant because it's totally true when you start to explain it out loud, the moment you put it into words. And also when you're explaining it to somebody else, you're forced to break it down and move through it piece by piece. And it's that process that really, really frequently will reveal that you're an idiot.
By the way, you just described what is known as a Hindenburg.
A Hindenburg?
Yeah, a Hindenburg, a single bug, and everything goes up in a big fireball.
It goes back.
There's a great website about programmers jargon. Just a quick side note: if you like those terms, look it up.
It's that's good. I like that, Hindenburg. Pretty much everything in JavaScript is one of those, I think.
Right. There are Hindenburgs, there are Heisenbugs, and many more. Yeah.
Is a Heisenbug one?
Oh, I've had a few Heisenbugs.
Only,
I like this a lot. This is good. But yes, we've gotten weirdly esoteric. More so than usual, which is dangerous territory, I'm sure.
You're welcome.
So flipping back somewhat towards the experts thing. One of the problems with this is that it might lead credence to a criticism of SE, which I don't think is entirely invalid, but maybe not for the reasons that it proposes, which is that street epistemology is only effective with people who are inexperienced in having these kinds of conversations. So in some ways, the assertion here, I think, is that street epistemologists are sort of praying as being highly prepared people ready for a conversation, leaping on the unsuspecting individual member of the public who is just quietly going about their day and is not prepared or ready for this kind of conversation, and then use their clever, tricksy rhetorical technique to make the unsuspecting member of the public feel that they must be wrong about something in some way, and that this is hugely unfair, and it's a very biased system here, and that SE is really only effective, or is at its most effective, in those spaces because of this sort of disparity of experience in the topic or conversation. I disagree with it, but I think that the problem is that there is a component of it which is true. What do you guys think?
How do you square that with the fact that many people who you interview want to continue the conversation and have more conversations after the first one?
Good question. Yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah, if we maintain good rapport and they're happy with the result, how have we taken advantage?
It could be a kind of conversational Stockholm syndrome, though, couldn't it? I suppose that they're sort of suddenly finding themselves attacked, and they're quite empathizing with their hostage. Rather,
let's replace rapport with Stockholm syndrome.
Conversational Stockholm syndrome.
Yeah, that's good.
But I mean, in the sense that I guess from the if we were looking at this from a critic's perspective, it might seem like we are trained to go in and be very convincing, which I'm laughing at this because I was recently watching a video. I can't remember
Wait,
whose
very
video it was.
convincing. What?
Well, exactly, yes. But I'm laughing
Yeah, no,
because
no. That's a good question.
Well, no, but that's exactly. Well, actually, underlying a lot of this is usually a suspicion that we're promoting either atheism or something else, right? There's a
We're
sort of
promoting
hidden.
critical thinking. Yes, absolutely.
We are promoting
You're an
critical
advocate
thinking.
of
That is
critical
true.
thinking, and we're
We are
modeling
biased.
it. If I convince you to critically think by modeling it, was I convincing?
I think so. Yeah. And I think we're biased. We have a huge bias in favor of reason. And some people dislike that bias, but it's a bias, and we absolutely are biased in that way. But I was recently watching a YouTube video. It was really well put together, and I've really forgotten who it was who made it, about youth pastors. Right, youth pastors are these. If you haven't seen this, I do urge you to Google it, but be ready with the cringe ointment or whiskey. Youth pastors are basically church pastors who are specifically there to make friends with the children, the kids, the teenagers. They're deliberately very energetic and funky and groovy. They're usually a little bit, they work at being cool. They spend a lot of time with the kids. They visit them at home. They go out and see them in their sports events and in their theater events and what have you. They encourage them. They're always there to talk to them. Yes, I mean, and it absolutely does go.
I see the cringe. I see the cringe.
It goes, and so you've got these sort of
You're all thinking about something that we're not saying.
Late 30s, early 40s guys just dressing far too casually for their own good, being far too relaxed, trying to use language that they clearly learned an hour ago, and all of the concerning ramifications about what might happen when a grown adult is responsible for a large group of children in this way and encouraged to become overly familiar with them in some ways. Obviously that all occurs as well. So, but the reality is here that we've got this situation where, a lot of organizations are doing this deliberately manipulative set of tools. They're using manipulation. Religion has been using manipulation forever in order to make persuasive arguments. And so it's kind of not
and it's persuasive in orders and everything else.
I mean, just literally, I was listening to some scene. Actually, I was watching The Godfather, great movie. I've seen it many times, but I recently rewatched it. And there's a scene where Corleone he's at a baptism of his first child, where he's becoming a godfather for the first time, and the priest is there, sort of giving it the ceremony, and he's saying things in Latin, and his voice is echoing beautifully around this wonderful church, and that is a form of persuasion, right? The way a person's voice will sound in that room is an act of persuasion. It's saying there's something different about this voice, that's something more important. It's not just coming from the person, it's coming from God, except it's not. It's just coming from the echoes, but that sort of sounds like God in a way, and it's kind of interesting. So
blasphemy.
It kind of makes me think, yes, heretical echoes, but it kind of makes me think, that maybe, this is sort of the pot trying to cool the kettle black, in the sense, in as much as it's people are so used to everybody pushing an agenda and forcing a narrative that everything looks like that. I really don't think SE is trying to do that, and I don't even think those people that are genuinely atheistic and wish to see atheism, for example, become more prevalent, that are doing SE well. I don't even think that when they're doing SE well, they're not pushing atheism.
Neither of you guys are real atheists. Everybody I know who's a real atheist is an ex-theist.
An ex-theist is the only way to be a true atheist.
The only way to be a true atheist. You guys are fake theists. No,
yeah, I can believe that. I can get on board with that.
Okay.
I've said
that's just me throwing soup. Never mind.
No, that's fine. I think that might actually, it's a concern I've had personally, honestly, that I've never done that. I've never had to leave a religious narrative. And I don't know that I could. Like, I can spit a good game right now, right, in the comfort of my own happy wheelhouse, right? But I don't know that
if you were to make that big a change in your life, you don't know that that's going to work.
I'm worried I would be a great youth pastor. That's what I'm worried about. Like, like, I don't want to know that about me, right? If that was true, like that.
Anyway, go ahead.
Nathan talks about his box of truth. That's a question I wouldn't want to know the answer. Would Will have been a terrifyingly predatory youth pastor given a different course of life? I don't want to know that about me. I just don't. But yeah, I think I think it's an interesting flip with this thing, which is that SE the generalized tool set that we use for street epistemology conversations, I think, is more effective with people who are not haven't spent an awful lot of time reflecting on the reasons why they believe what they believe, because it's there to encourage them to do that. We want them to do that. And if they spend a lot of time reflecting on it and they still believe it, then I guess that's fine. I don't think from an SE perspective there's much to say, except we could still keep exploring, of course.
Right. And if they're just reflecting, if they came to the conclusion either they are not really just honestly not interested in what's true, or they are interested in what's true, but they sincerely believe that contradictions are not a problem when trying to understand what's true. And they sincerely believe that.
So sorry.
Yeah. Cringy, William.
I'm with you on this.
Sorry.
There are epistemologies where truth is determined by reasons that rattle my brain, like political expediency, or everybody's got their own and there isn't a universal one or anything like that. And that rattles my brain a little bit, but it's just another definition of truth, and they don't have any particular use for my definition because they don't share my epistemology. Okay, right. There we are. Now I understand you. As far as I know.
Then again, what's interesting is when you have these relative or truth relativists, and they say, well, it's true for me, it might not be true for you. And then you ask them about that, how that works.
Yeah.
Oftentimes you will come to a realization that, there are some things where I believe that there is an objective truth that we can determine, and you can actually be mistaken. It's not all true, but some things are actually not true or false. Yeah. What's the difference between the Tic Tacs and that belief that I have? Where do I draw the line? How does that work? And which is interesting because it seems like the kind of epistemology that there seems to be some intuitive epistemology that most street epistemologists rely on. And you don't need to study philosophy and epistemology to do SE.
Agreed.
So you use that intuitive understanding of how you determine truth, what truth is. Sure. And I think most people share that.
I can quantify it, I can categorize it, I can see it in action, I can see it used in words, and I can replicate the words. Those are my four favorite.
Okay.
And this is what sort of makes me think that when you get somebody who says, or as you did in your previous example, Dali, where you say, no, you're using a different epistemology, at least I now understand, where you're. Well, sure. you have to have a reason to know that your epistemology is useful, or that it's a good and worthwhile. What is your confidence that this other epistemology is useful? And then where do you stand to judge that epistemology's efficacy?
Right. I think what we're saying is there are many people who express they are truth relativists, as we would call it. Yes. They have a version of truth that the Tic Tac test is there to try to point them back toward a truth that I would call truth.
Yes.
I think in many cases we have the examples where we can say, okay, you're a truth relativist in these categories, but you are a truth objectivist when you go to the bank. And,
yes. Yeah.
And when you're doing,
or at least when you expect your bank manager to be a truth objectivist.
yes. You want your bank teller to be a truth objectivist, and you will insist on it. And the same thing if you get pulled over for a speeding ticket. You will get real damn specific about exactly what miles per hour or meters per second means. If we can say, okay, you're a truth relativist sometimes, but you're a truth objectivist other times, let's talk about the common ground where we have truth objectivism.
Yeah, this is the thing that this is referenced in Storm by Tim Minchin in his beautiful poem Storm, which is wonderful. Which is where he talks about if opinions are just if facts are just opinions, then is it truly just an opinion about whether you leave the door through the front door or through the second story window? Is it all just opinion about whether or not you're going to fall to your death in the second example?
Theory.
Or as Dawkins once expressed it very eloquently, it works, bitches.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
But this is the thing. It's like I feel that most people that claim to use a different epistemology in some areas of their life have to be using the same basic epistemology that we all use to navigate what appears to us to be reality in any given moment, and are just choosing to use a different epistemology in one particular instance. And the only place that they can now say, well, look, in this little garden, my rules are I was going to say godlike, but my rules persist, and therefore, I can say truth is relative, and I can say up is down, and I can say A is B, whatever I want to do, right? Because this is my little space of logic, and if I maintain that this is the rules of my little epistemology, then I can have it. But then they have to justify why they've chosen to have that epistemology and apply it selectively. As they don't have to justify that, but that's the thing to call to the attention, isn't it? Like you clearly don't use this in all areas of your life. Also, how did you determine that this was a good epistemology to use in this case? And where did you stand to do that? Those sorts of things really confuse me. I really don't know what people mean when they say that they have a different epistemology. I don't think it means what they think it means oftentimes.
Yeah. If I say I have an epistemology, I really mean that I have a flowchart with several different things, and it depends on the category of things. There's some things which quantifiable is my epistemology. There are some things where definitions of words are my epistemology, and those don't overlap, those two areas. I have different ways of getting to some of those. Quaid has recently elucidated a fifth epistemology, which I'm trying to adopt, and that is that the experts in a field are almost always right. It's an obvious argument of authority, and it's inductive, and it has confidence limits. So I'm like, oh, I could.
What do you mean by right? What do you mean by right in this instance?
That the experts, you could ask Quaid because he's good at describing this, that the experts in a field are much more correct about things than the amateurs in that field.
So when an expert in a field makes a statement about the field, it is much more likely to be true, a true statement.
Yeah, it's much more likely to be true than, say, the average opinion of the common man.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see this
the
sort
obvious
of
problem.
it is good, but like
paradigm shift.
I really love thinking about things in terms of mental models, and that we construct these mental models at different resolutions and to different degrees of eloquency, right? And an expert's mental model of something is likely to be better informed and much more sophisticated than my mental model as a non-expert, especially if it's in an esoteric field, a field that I don't have any experience in. So I would definitely say that in likely contrast to my own mental model, an expert's mental model is more likely to be a better mental model of the thing that it's describing. But I don't think that we get to true from this, right? This doesn't say the expert's view is more likely to be true necessarily, or even that we can say the expert's model is true. We can just say that their mental model is probably a better model, and that's not a better model is not the same as true. Sorry.
That's the claim. It's not the claim that their model is true. It's that their model has a higher probability of being true.
But I don't think this has reference to truth. And this is where this is just, I guess, my challenge here, which is that I don't think we can make reference to truth. I don't think we need to make reference to truth. We can just simply say their mental model is likely to be a better model. Better models exist, but truth is undetermined. We can't know true, right? So therefore,
I think you think that it is true that their model is a better model.
I think my mental model that it is likely to be a better mental model is a better model than not the model that would predict it wouldn't be. But I mean, and that was.
You want to add on to avoid the word true.
But no, but that we don't have true. We've never. What do you know?
Yeah,
that is true?
we don't have
have
true. We don't have access,
We
direct
don't have
access
to truth.
we
I-
don't have direct access to truth. We have never had and will never have
Exactly.
absolute eternal truth, but that's not what we're talking about here.
No,
Oh,
no.
yeah.
and
When we were
it's-
talking about
It's bringing in
epistemology,
Cartesian truth, right?
Sorry, second. Sorry.
Cartesian truth of which we can know with a really certainty.
right?
Really, absolutely true. You know,
Right,
add all
but-
things.
And William, when we're talking about epistemology, we're talking about how do you determine what's true, and when we use the word true in that context, of course, we don't mean that kind of truth. We mean the kind of something that can't be falsified, something that has not been falsified, even though people have tried really hard to falsify it.
Yeah.
And that is
Yes.
still a model, but that is
It is
what,
a better mental model, and
Yeah.
you could say that. So I use the phrase sometimes like this becomes a de facto truth, as in it is not actually
Yes.
true, but it becomes an effective
Yes.
truth, right? And
Yes.
I would say that there are things, of course, in common parlance, in general conversation, I would say it is true that I am married, right? I wouldn't say that my mental model of my relationship with the person I think of as my wife is currently contextualized in this concept of marriage, which is a language word that I've come to understand socially and culturally has meant a certain dynamic within two individuals. Except you don't say this, you just say I'm married, right? And it's true. But this is one of the things that I really loved, and I've mentioned this before, but I don't know if anybody, I'm sure you have. You guys heard the original Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy radio series by Douglas Adams? If you haven't heard it, and if anybody listening to this hasn't heard it, the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy
versions.
is an absolute joy. The whole thing is an absolute joy, and there's a wonderful moment at the end of I think it's called the first phase now, the first phase of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, where they essentially use this magical spaceship effectively that uses the infinite improbability drive, that uses wonderful science terms to basically break out of reality and meet this person who is essentially, they never say that this entity is God. They just say that this is the person sort of behind it, who's making the decision, that's making all the calls, and there's a sort of heavy inference, and he never talks in absolutes. He has a cat, he's feeding the cat, and at one point this guy gets very frustrated with him and says, look, you're feeding your cat, you must know that this cat exists. He goes, I don't know anything at all. He says, I merely am behaving in a way that seems to me to be kind towards what also seems to me to be a cat. That's all I can do. And I'm like, that's it. That's it in exact nutshell. To me, that's exactly my epistemology, my philosophy of everything. It's like certainties are absurd, but you can have better mental models.
I don't have to throw out the word truth. I can use truth in a sloppy way that are probably true.
Do we want Dali's sloppy truth?
I mean, if we don't, what are we even talking about? What?
It's fine.
What are we talking about when? What is epistemology? I thought epistemology was the method that we use to determine what is true. But since there is no truth, there is, in that sense, epistemology.
No, we've
meaningless.
broken the universe again.
Yeah, again,
without using the word truth.
Yes,
epistemology is how we come to believe things.
Oh, actually, I think epistemology is how we get to better models. Like, what tools do we use to improve our models? That's it. Like, how do I?
The science of epistemology is chugging down our epistemologies into a good epistemology. Our individual epistemologies are the way we come to believe. Our model of epistemology is how we do it.
A model of epistemology is how we come to believe. Yeah, and so there's the interesting component here, because I don't think I think human beings have an innate epistemology, like a foundational low-level software program, right? Which
the first one is believe your parents.
Well, actually, I think the first one is I'm hungry and maybe need to poop at the same time. I think those are your early belief systems. Like, and I think that you probably start out with something like, I'm happy or I'm not happy.
Yeah.
and everything is believed in
church. When I
Yeah.
do that, it feels good. I believe. Okay,
I
so
want
very-
things that feel nice, and I want to avoid things that feel bad. That's the
Yes.
sort of early epistemology, yeah. And then I think from there, all else grows, and like you learn to do things like predict. Object permanence, for example, comes in and starts to inform. Object permanence is the
Do children have to reason or learn their way to trust their parents?
Yes, I think they do have to learn to trust their parents.
Janos?
I suspect they have instincts that get fulfilled by their parents,
Yeah.
and therefore that happens very quickly. But I suspect that they
don't
they
have to
will-
learn to suck a nipple. They know that. They own
yeah,
it. That's
instinctive.
hardwired.
Yeah. That's hardwired.
Yeah, I think
How do you have reason to believe your parents is not hardwired?
I don't think believe your parents is hardwired, but I think over time your parents prove to be, well, actually initially you don't believe your parents, but you realize that your parents might punish you for not following their injunctions. As in that there's a cost to not believing your parents, to not trusting and following your parents. So
where would that come from?
So we might induct into believing our parents. We might induce that.
We might induce it. We might.
You keep telling me this is good. I bite it, and it doesn't hurt
No.
me.
No. Well,
you give me is good.
No, so I don't. I think, and babies will suckle with other people. It doesn't have to be the mother, right? It's just it's a response to a stimulus when hungry, right?
Parents.
Yeah.
But those are the ones that I'm thinking about. Those are the ones that talk to the babies.
Yeah,
and very soon the babies trust their parents much more than other people. But that might just be how much time versus strength.
Yeah. At what point are you really aware of the distinction between your parents and other people, right? And then how aware are you that there are people other than your parents? Even I think you probably, distinguishing between parents takes a little bit of time.
Yeah. When we have mama and dada and can pick the right one, that's when we know.
And that takes a little while. That's not immediate. So,
right.
Yeah, and in learning to trust your parents, which is interesting because I've spoken about this quite a bit, which is this idea that a lot of people get into religious perspectives because they inherit it from their parents, and like when your parents tell you, this is true and you have to believe it and it's really important. That's the same people that say in that same tone of voice, "Don't stick the fork in the electrical socket," right? And so evolution tends to weed out those children, I think, that don't have that instinct to take the word of their parents, very, very seriously at the very least.
Yeah.
But that means that something like an injunction to keep yourself safe and alive, like look both ways when you cross the road, can get mixed up with an injunction to make sure that you chop your foreskin off or something, or make sure that you spend a huge proportion of your lifetime praying or something, and potentially
chop your foreskin off like this was somebody choosing to do it for themselves.
Yeah, you're right. I realized the bris is a little earlier in the lifetime. It's not really a choice, but it's somewhat taken, not offered, isn't it? But in any case, it's
it's somebody else choosing.
Somebody else is choosing, indeed. But this is a concerning component over a lot of people's narratives, because it gets wrapped up in these really. And to me, I say when people say there's no good reason to believe in religion, I think that is at the very least one good reason, which is that you haven't had any other experiences, and the lesson of your religion has come from your parents, and you've learned to respect and trust them, and that's a good reason, I think, to believe in a religion.
Well, up to a certain point, I would say, because that's what happens with children. At some point, they start to realize that their parents are just people, and I remember how weird that felt when that really hit me the first time. They're just people.
It's a watershed moment, if you pardon the. Yeah, it is. It is weird when you realize your parents are fallible and make mistakes and are emotional and actually, that's a weird moment for people growing up, I think.
I think I'm correct to say that most people that are religious became religious before they were 8 or between 18 and 25. That's the majority. There's obviously a distribution, but those are the two big chunks.
Yeah, there's a slightly sinister and increasingly sinister injunction from the old English church, I think, which is, give me the child for the first 8 years and I'll give you the man, right? And that's to say, after 8 years old, if you've got them into the religion and it's been drilled into them, then it's going to be hard for them to wander too far astray. That's a concerning thing, which is why ideas like religious schools, for example, are concerning. This is a very concerning idea.
Yeah,
and yet,
high school and junior high school and those years, it's just maintenance. There's evangelism of a 14-year-old is just no. Don't bother. And I'm not giving the evangelicals or evangelists of any religion any tools they don't already know. They completely know that you get them before 7 or 8, or you get them 18 to 25, and everybody else is just, well, you leave the doors open because they might come in.
Yeah, this is one of the reasons why I do bristle a little bit at some of the criticism I aimed against street epistemology. Not that we shouldn't be open to this criticism, or that none of it's entirely valid, but some of it does seem to be the case that they're expecting. For years, religions have used incredibly manipulative tactics. They've targeted children. They've used emotional manipulation. They've used horrific rhetoric of terrible pains and sufferings and induced fear. And when they've been really strong, religion has tortured and maimed and killed people in the service of the religion. And to hear some of the criticism of some street epistemologists might be going out there and maybe pushing atheism a bit during their conversation with people about maybe having rational reasons to think things, and then saying this is proselytizing, this is evangelizing, this is in some way an equivocation, an equivalent to sort of a religious narrative, and that we should just be honest about the fact that it's religious indoctrination just like anything else. And you'll often hear as well, atheism is just as dogmatic as any other religion, which is absolutely patently absurd.
I disagree, but so what?
Yes, well, so what indeed, and it doesn't really mean anything or change anything, but it does.
Yeah, I'm an evangelist.
It does seem quite a remarkable feat of lacking in self-awareness, I think, from some religious quarters. I think when you get those kinds of questions.
Then again, I don't know, when someone accuses street epistemologists of being of proselytizing, and you're, William, what you just said, well, in the past, religion has done this, religion has done that. I think that's not that. That's putting everything under the label of religion, and that's not really fair. Because what they're not accusing you of those things. They are accusing you of being manipulative. And sure, you can say a religion is manipulative. But that doesn't necessarily mean that these people who are accusing you of that are being manipulative, even if they are religious.
Yeah. No, I understand. It is not really a retort to a specific person. And it's more of a general feeling of
right. And I get the response, of course, because obviously, but but I think there are better ways to show that street epistemology is probably one of the least manipulative ways of having a conversation. And to a degree, like
manipulative tools back in the back pocket and don't pull them out.
Right. Yeah, any conversation that you have has the potential of changing the way that people think or giving them new ideas, which is why we have conversations. And
I think that's why even all of language.
Right, exactly.
Level, all of language is an
exchange
attempt to
of ideas.
Behavior.
Yes, and street epistemology is the way we really try our best to not to impose our own ideas on other people. We try and understand other people and have them reflect on them, and then just maybe nudge them a little bit, like point into a direction. What about that? That's basically all that we're doing.
Yeah, I agree.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
No, I saw that as well. Yeah.
Kurgula says, I think manipulation is a different one.
Sorry, yes. No, go ahead.
Very important to talk about and ensure that novel street epistemologists do not use it manipulatively, and I'm going to push back. We don't want to use our manipulation surreptitiously. We are, in fact, trying to convince. We are, in fact, trying to persuade. And I want us to own those terms. We are
I
not trying
disagree
to
with
do
it.
so in a nasty way. We're not trying to do so in a surreptitious or secret way. We're doing it flat out. And we're trying to encourage critical thinking. We're trying to encourage reflection. We're trying to encourage being open to changing your mind and saying, I don't know. And some of us will even step outside of SE and will openly encourage you to change your vote on political matters. If I can convince you to vote my way on queer issues, that's great. That's not SE, but it could be in the next conversation over. Things like that.
I disagree specifically with the persuasion component. I don't think I think street epistemology should not only not own the term persuasion, but I think it should also actively work to remove persuasion from the it should fight against persuasion in its practice. And the reason I think that is that persuasion is trying to get you to get to where I am. Persuasion is I'm trying to persuade you to get to a certain position. I want you to be somewhere where you may or may not be, right? And if you're not there, then I want you to be there. So I'm going to try to encourage you to get you to where I think you should be.
I think you're
I
using
don't think.
different definitions of persuasion, and
Are
you
we?
should
Oh,
be-
okay.
you should talk about
And
definitions and
word.
use more SE with each other.
Okay. So what's your definition of persuasion, Dali?
Influencing your mind on an axis.
Influencing
And-
your mind on an axis. Okay.
Yeah, so on a particular topic or a particular thing that we're talking about, I want to influence you toward better critical thinking.
Okay.
The topic that you bring, the claim that you bring, I can ignore and I can be neutral completely about that. And I want you to think about it, and I want you to tell me what you think are good reasons to believe. And yes, I want to persuade someone to think critically about it. And I'm going to do so by modeling critical thinking on their topic. Talk to them, listen to them, hear them out, model my own questions that would come up in my own critical thinking about that topic. What would go on in my head if I were taking this data? Reflect that back to them. And if they adopt some of that, I have indeed persuaded them to think about their claim more critically. I'm not necessarily trying to move them on their claim toward my position. That would be a different level of persuasion. And that that's kind of
Well,
outside
this
of
is
SE.
this is where maybe I feel well, okay, on the point of persuading somebody to critically reflect, I agree, and I think that's probably that is a reason. If that's what you meant by persuasion, then there's nothing about that I would struggle with. But I do think that the language of persuasion, or the idea of persuasion, should be one that we expunge from SE, because I think specifically SE, if I think many people will equate street epistemology to persuading people to a specific position, so that they'll equate it with the debating tools, or they'll debate it with persuasion, with sort of
I think this is
evangelizing a position. Saying, sorry.
I think this is a Mott and Bailey fallacy.
Okay,
You take the term manipulation.
Mhm.
When people say manipulation in the negative, they mean covert manipulation.
Mhm.
If I overtly manipulate you, William, please come to my show at such and such a time. Come in half an hour early for tech check. That's overt manipulation. I am directly asking you to do something, maybe for no more reason than it will please me.
Completely agree. Sorry,
Dali, do you think when people hear the word manipulation that they have this differentiation in their mind, and that they
some do, some
understand the same when they hear manipulation as what you mean by it?
This is where the Mott and Bailey comes in. You can protect the Mott, but not the Bailey. You claim the Bailey and you back off to the Mott. In this case, all we're trying to say is
I'm not familiar with that.
Manipulation. Okay, so ignore the Mott and Bailey fallacy. I'm just introducing terms that are unimportant. if you say we can't have manipulation because it's bad, and we equivocate to include both versions of what manipulation mean, then we throw the baby out with the bathwater, because we need to overtly manipulate to even stay in a dialogue.
Well, all conversation is manipulation to a certain extent, and so I would agree, and I also think that there is a problem with asking a question about how can you tell me your definition of a certain word, for example, and encouraging that person to reflect on what they want to say in that response, and then they give their response, and then that act comes because we want people to spend more time reflecting on what they think they know.
Yes.
And so if in that sense we are persuading people to take the time to do that reflection, but that is really importantly, I think, where the persuasion needs to end, the manipulation needs to end. That is the full extent of the bias. We're biased towards rational critical thinking, and we're motivated to persuade people to reflect. The moment we do anything else, though, we persuade them to any other end, I suspect we're stepping outside of street epistemology and moving into the realms of employing rhetoric or trying to push people and evangelize for a particular position.
The very idea that I am asking you to follow into a formatted conversation like street epistemology, where we're going to do this, and one person's going to ask more questions, and they're going to this, and all the things, is an overt manipulation. And it's only overt if it's communicated. Now, if you have a term that includes overt manipulation and excludes covert manipulation, I'd like to just adopt that term.
If I said you should be an atheist in a conversation with a theist, and as part of my street epistemology conversation, that would still be an overt act, right? It would be very obvious. It wouldn't be subtle. It wouldn't be me trying to manipulate somebody secretively. But I think the moment I said in an SE conversation, I think you should be an atheist, I think I've overstepped the boundaries of an SE conversation and entered into a place where I am now pressing a specific agenda. I'm not saying to that person, it's direct messaging is one of the key components of it. Absolutely. Yeah. So I'm not saying to that person, I'm not encouraging that person to reflect on what they believe and come to their own conclusions. What I'm doing is telling them what their conclusion should be, where they should end up.
I mean, as far as I understand, Dali is not saying any overt manipulation can be part of an SE conversation. Instead, the way I understand Dali is the only kind of manipulation that ever has place in an SE conversation can only be overt manipulation, but not any. Just
I could yell at them and shout, "Please stand there! Stand over here! Stand over here! Stand over here! Now jump, jump, jump!"
Right?
No, but it would be overt manipulation, right?
But the problem,
we don't want all the options. Yeah.
However, the way I see it, the problem that I see with that is that yes, if you look at the term manipulation, what it really means, quote unquote, what is you can make that differentiation. You can differentiate between covert and overt manipulation. However, the problem is that most people, when they hear manipulation, they think of sneaky and dishonest and all of that. And I don't think that we can I don't think we can change that. I don't think we will ever be able to change the perception that when people hear manipulation, they will think of that dishonest type of manipulation. And when we say, of course, SE is manipulative, what people hear will be, of course, we're trying to sneakily get you to believe what we want you to believe.
Yeah. I want to say, of course, SE has manipulation. We keep it overt. We keep it kind.
Right.
Yeah,
but people are still going to hear that. Oh, sir, you're being manipulative. So you're admitting that, and they will not really hear
Please give me a
what
better
you say,
term.
it's over, it's kind. They will only hear
I want to start
manipulation.
with your term that is only the right kind of stuff. And I do want to admit that, yes, what I'm doing qualifies as manipulation. And here's my special pleading, hand waving that it's overt and it's kind.
Well, I think we could agree, as we have done, I think, that all language, all communication is designed to manipulate. And so by calling it out specifically in this instance, you are suggesting that this is actually manipulation over and above the baseline. This is manipulation at a level that's worth distinguishing this conversation from the baseline of general manipulation that all speech adopts.
Yeah.
And so there is a genuine question about whether or not why you might feel the need to do so. If I'm going to ask you if you're having a nice day, I don't want to prefix that by saying I'm going to manipulate you now. And I'm going to ask you, in my next question, and then ask them if they're having a nice day. That is still manipulation. I might be trying to, make them think I care about them. I might be trying to encourage them to have a nice day. I might be expressing a concern for them that's a precursor to other questions. All this stuff is wrapped up in the wonderful dance that is language, right? But specifically calling it out, I think, becomes anomalous, and therefore people are going to give it undue consideration, and I think that's the reason why I think persuasion should be avoided, even to the extent where we're sort of talking about how we want to persuade people to reflect, which is ultimately true. We can say I want that is what I want, but if I say I'm going to try and persuade you to reflect, I think partly there's an idea here that persuasion and manipulation seem to be ways in which we're acting against the will of the individual that we're speaking to.
Okay.
So
Which is
you could convince me of something, or you could manipulate me to believe something. Convincing me and they could be the same conclusions, right? But if I'm convinced of something, that's me hearing the argument, judging it, and making a conscious decision to move into into that position. But if I'm manipulated into doing that, it's being done without my knowledge and consent. I'm finding my will imposed upon. So I think we don't want that manipulation. We want to try to convince people. Well,
we have covert manipulations in the system.
Such as what?
Because we don't disclose to them ahead of time what a tic-tac test, a Ferrari test, or an outsider test is, or when it's going to be put in. We do the test before we tell them that this is a test. We don't flag our thing and ask them to sign a paper saying, hi, we're going to use a series of thought experiments with you that are probably novel for you, and we're prepared to deal with them, and we expect you're not.
Any conversation worth having is certainly novel, and a non-novel conversation is probably not worth having. I don't know why. Why do you feel it's not? Firstly, we don't always use the tic-tac test, and secondly, even if we were to use the tic-tac
we have more
test,
than the three that I mentioned too.
Sure, but
I just mean that this is the argument that somebody looking at from the outside says.
Sure, I understand.
Here's where you're practiced. Here's where you're doing it wrong.
Right.
I'm trying to steal man Daniel Ray here for us.
Poor Daniel. He's
I love Daniel.
There are more critics of SE than Daniel, but
he's one of the most clearly spoken ones.
He has a beautiful voice.
He does. Of SE critics.
But I think this manipulation is not. But I don't understand why we would feel that in any given conversation I'm going to use language. And every word choice that I use is part of my attempt to. There's a wonderful thing called speech act theory, which is a theory that doesn't really get enough credit these days. And I really like it, so I mention it quite a lot. But it's this idea of illocution and perlocution. And illocution is the language you choose to use, but perlocution is the desired change you want to have in the world. So I use all speech performatively. And I'm trying to, in the effortful work that I'm doing to make a sentence or have a conversation with you, I am trying to make a change happen in the world, even if it's a tiny one. And so in that sense, I've now got a perlocutionary desire, like a force to change what my objective of this next sentence is going to be. But then I have illocutionary decisions to make. How am I going to phrase my request? What language am I use? What tone of voice will I use? What way of getting to the topic am I going to adopt? And all of this is very much a persuasion, manipulation style position, which is again why all language at a baseline is manipulation, right? You're trying to have a change happen. You're using words to get to where you want to have happen. But the challenge here is that we seem to be wanting to now put street epistemology under a greater burden of what's the word I'm looking for? It's completely lost my head. It's too hot in here. A greater burden of responsibility to represent this in a way that's not just honest but goes beyond honest, to become, I think, confusing. If we were to say this tic-tac test is now is a test, and this is the reason why I'm doing it, I don't think that's going to make the tic-tac test any more or less effective necessarily, but it is going to ruin the nature of the conversation. If we're on it, because your conversation partner, everything your conversation partner is going to be saying to you is also going to be manipulation. It's also going to try to be changing you, right? So and so in the cadence of the conversation, in the normal discourse, you having one party constantly call out, for example, when they might be using language in a certain way or using a certain thought experiment.
Make it overt enough because there just isn't bandwidth.
Yeah, exactly. It's an unreasonable burden to place upon, I think, street epistemology.
I think there's true situations where people could hypothetically either accuse street epistemology of being manipulative or a way of persuading people in a certain direction. That is either in a personal conversation. They are talking to you and they are accusing you as a street epistemologist or a street epistemology as a conversation technique, or in front of a crowd. And I think when you're talking to them personally, well, what do? You try to get their definition of what is manipulation. Are there any conversations that are not manipulative? Or is there anything that is any way of having a conversation where you're not trying to persuade someone of something?
Right.
And so you're doing SE basically on the claim that SE is manipulative.
Yes.
In front of a crowd, I believe.
Good explanation of Vaughn Bailey, by the way. Just for fun. That was a good explanation.
In front of a crowd, by admitting, yes, sure, we're being manipulative, I think you're hurting SE, because people will hear, yes, we're being manipulative. We are covertly trying to get people to believe what we believe. They're going to hear that.
I don't know if it would be covert necessarily.
I'm saying the other thing.
Yeah.
I'm saying that we are on the good side of manipulation. We are on the good side of persuasion.
No one will hear that. No one will hear that. But there will be one or two people in the crowd who will understand what you're getting at.
So if the other side says manipulation or persuasion, we've just lost the argument because the audience.
You don't have to lose the argument. You can say, well, instead of saying, of course we are, you can say, well, it depends if what I believe you mean when you say it's manipulative. If you mean that, then no, we're not. However, I will concede that, and you would have to explain what you mean, like in what way. If you have the time and the opportunity to really break it down and explain in the way that every single conversation that you will ever have in your entire lifetime, and anyone will ever have, is manipulative. Yes,
that's
SE
the first
is
thing
also
I said.
manipulative.
The very first thing I said is every piece of language that we ever utter is to persuade, to modify somebody's behavior.
Okay. So can we talk? So let's just say that as we've all agreed, I think every conversation has a baseline level of manipulation, right? That's because of the nature of the desire for speech is it's baked in. So the interesting component here is what the only reason to call it out is if you feel that street epistemology somehow exceeds the baseline to an extent where it's necessary to warn somebody of the uniquely
bad side, the evil side.
No, I mean, I think I'm trying to think about the times where I might, in the course of a normal conversation, refer to what I'm about to do as persuasion, or manipulation, or call it out. I might do that only in the case of an example where the conversation's framing would shift as a result of me wanting to now frame this act of persuasion. And in fact, me mentioning that this is persuasion, or that I might be trying to do a bit of manipulation, in itself is persuasion and an act of manipulation.
Yes, it is.
I mean, because it's reframing the conversation in a different direction.
I just want to mention real quick that Kurglo said Janosch is right. Just
yeah, he said that a while ago. I ignored it.
Yeah, but it's true.
Just as a general policy, we don't sort of have that kind of thing said on this channel. It's offensive to a lot of.
I'm not going to follow your policy. I'm a stubborn bastard. Janosch is right.
I am.
I think it's interesting. So anyway, I like this conversation largely because I think in some ways, I think there's an attempt here to be really honest and open, right? And the problem is there's a danger inherent in that, which is weird, right? There shouldn't be a danger inherent in being more honest and more open, except that really when it comes into conflict with people that are just not familiar in thinking about these things, it's the reason why doctors, for example, might have simplistic terms to describe complex ailments. Yes. They could describe the more complicated thing, but all it will do is confuse somebody. They could, and the same thing happens with treatment. Actually, the treatment could be more complicated than the doctor necessarily is letting on. But essentially, in order to get the patient to understand what they need to do, a simplified version is actually more effective. And so in this case, I think the same thing comes when it comes to the honesty of the conversation. I don't think we're being dishonest. I think that if I thought we were being dishonest, I think I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't just not have to call it out. I just wouldn't do it. If I was genuinely being manipulative to the extent that I thought it was exceeding the basic norms of conversation, I think then I would call it out, or in fact would choose not to do it. But I don't.
If you choose to not do something, please also call me on doing it.
If what? Sorry, I missed the first part.
If you take something out of your toolkit because you think it's bad or smells funny, call me on it as well.
Well, that's one of the things I think is brilliant about the SE community. Honestly, I really think that is one of its major strengths. It's one of the reasons why I'm so glad that we're doing the SE review shows again. Because honestly, I think talking about this is why I think this community has a soul and it has a heart. It has it's eye in the right direction. So
I think I like your comparison with doctors talking about certain things in simple terms. Doctors will often say when someone has a tumor, a doctor will be very careful about using the word tumor because a tumor can be benign. It can mean, oh, it's a tiny little growth that you have. We can remove it. You'll be fine. But if you tell a patient, well, you have a benign tumor there and there, blah, 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 patients will hear the word tumor and panic. Absolutely, and the rest will just be a blur of words and they won't even listen. And I think that's what I mean. Of course, if you have the opportunity and you can assume that people are really listening the entire time and they really want to understand what you mean by manipulative in that context, then it might go well, and most people might actually understand, okay, yeah, I get that. Every single conversation is manipulative to a certain degree. And when we say manipulative, we usually mean above the baseline, etc. And most people haven't thought about that. Most people will have to first think about this and process that. Yeah. And in a crowd, I don't know how many people will actually be in a position where they will go through this process and understand that, and how many will just take away, street epistemology, this manipulative conversational technique, trying to persuade people of stuff. It's basically proselytizing. It's not better than what street preachers are doing.
Exactly.
I'd like to talk to Kurglo's thing below Janosch is right. If you have something else to say, go ahead first.
Oh, I did. I just really quickly before we get, I'll start that, so I'll bring that up in a second. But yeah, I did want to mention the fact that there's another danger, and there's a slippery slope argument that I am aware this is. But if we bake into the identity of street epistemology that it is a persuasive technique, even if by saying so what we mean is it's persuasion towards critical thinking.
Yes.
If we bake into the identity of street epistemology that it has persuasion at its core, it might become easier for street epistemologists to allow themselves to be persuasive in other areas. It opens the door to this. Right, horses are out of the barn. Exactly.
That horse is out.
No. But it's a common expression. Yeah.
Martin Bailey.
He's saying that SE is the king dong daddy of persuasion techniques.
Oh wow. Okay.
Okay. So if we want to try to backpedal out of that word, I think that horse is long out of the barn, and I think it's okay if we take it in.
Who says that?
David McCraney. Okay. How to change minds.
How minds change. Huge difference.
Thank you.
How titles change. I thought it was it not?
Indeed.
How books get misrepresented.
Yeah.
So I don't know. So yeah, I think many people may see SE as a persuasion technique. I think those who do are wrong, and I just think that I think it's not a persuasion technique, as in it involves persuasion to no greater extent than I think any other conversation. And I suspect that it's really what it's about is a reflection technique. What has happened? Rihanna's just paused rather strange. Everybody's paused.
Yeah, I really hope to persuade you.
Oh, cool. Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
The alternative, and my first salvo is please read his book. I will get it to you if necessary. I have the ebook.
I have it. It's on my reading list. I just haven't got around to it yet.
Excellent. Yes,
I did flick through the SE chapter though, which was like reading one of Anthony's videos.
Starting from the beginning, because it only gets way in because it shows all of these other persuasion techniques and how effective they are and how they overlap with street epistemology.
Yeah. I still think that the framing it as a persuasion technique, it misses the key component. I think it's about a technique to induce reflection. That's what I think it is, and I don't know that that's the same as a persuasion technique.
Those aren't separate.
It's
a technique to induce reflection. We are trying to persuade reflection.
Persuade somebody to reflect.
Yes.
I don't think I'm trying to persuade somebody because, well, I think that term, again, we're sort of circling back again, but I think the term persuade suggests that I'm trying to get somebody to do something against their own intuition to do it, or working against them to do it.
Why do we have these different words?
Why do we have? I said to you, I want to persuade you to vote with me on this issue. Whatever.
Cool. Persuade me.
If I say to you, I want to attempt to persuade you to vote this way. Am I doing anything weird? Am I doing anything
have to be, doesn't have to be weird, but it's.
Why do we have different terms like inspire, persuade, manipulate, nudge, motivate? Why do we have these different words if they all mean the same thing?
I don't know that. Yeah, exactly. So I think they must therefore have a nuance.
Venn diagram with me. Sure.
And I think encourage or inspire means to me, frames it for me better than persuade or manipulate.
Yeah.
I think persuasion feels and manipulation feels stronger than persuasion, but I think though in either case,
inspire is a much more persuading word. Yes.
Much more. Yes.
Much more persuasive. I'm sorry, I'm using.
But again, we're using language to seek a goal, and the goal is that I think we can agree the goal, which is we want people to reflect on the reasons why they believe what they believe and what they think and how they got there. We want people to take the time to do that, and I think that's great. And I do want people to see it. I don't want to be dishonest in what it is, and I think that it's a totally admirable desire to try to make this as honest as possible. How can we say this as honestly as possible? How can we present this without any illusions? And I think that it's a difficult task, right? Because interestingly, you're not nothing you've said is incorrect, Dali. I mean, I don't think anybody here is saying you're wrong in this. What we're saying is that against the way that people normally speak and how people normally hear those words and how people
Right.
normally interact with language, that's the environment in which precision is actually not a useful tool always.
Right. I'm being pedantic because I'm trying to answer a criticism.
Yes.
And
Well,
so
we're
I'm
trying to
being
make something
literal and accepting on myself whatever words have the worst connotation, and if they are an honest thing, answering them honestly. And I'm not going to use the word manipulate or persuade in the literature of here's how to do and why to do SE. I'm going to use the terms inspire. I'm going to talk about it in very narrow terms. Could you bring up the Kurglow comment?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I was waiting for
the argument should not be is SE manipulation. The argument should be what does SE organization to prevent it being used manipulatively. That word. SE organization, I'm going to change to SE community, because SE organization is a very specific group of people, which are not the ones that are the actual, I don't mean that they're not movers and shakers. I mean that they do less than half the moving and shaking, because there's a lot more people in the community, and this matters a lot. I listen to Will just as much as I listen to Reed. I listen to Janos just as much as I listen to Anthony. Okay,
Well,
so
I'm on the board.
that's the community part. Oh, okay. So I needed Mark Solomon. No,
yeah, Mark is not on the board, so yeah.
Gigi. Listen to Gigi a lot.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Absolutely.
what does the SE organization do to prevent it being used? And I want to change that other word, because if you came to me and said, Dali, you're being manipulative, and I'd say, yep. And you'd say, oh, but I meant to say you're being manipulative and you're doing it wrong because you're being manipulative. And I'm going to say, that's not a wrong. That's a feature, not a bug. What am I doing that's having a negative effect? Tell me about the negative effect am I having? Am I doing something bad on rapport? Am I making the community look bad? Am I setting up weird expectations for other people? Am I making people think they have to become Bible scholars before they something? Give me the reason for the effect. Because manipulative is not a term I'm going to respond to. All the other ones are.
Yeah, I like. I think that from one of the things I think the SE community is very good at is normalizing a certain set of feedback that you're likely to get if you make a certain type of error. There is no strong definition of SE. I've tried, everybody's tried. The definition of SE is universally agreed upon and universally disagreed upon at the same time. It's a Schrodinger's definition. It's weird.
Sure.
But fundamentally, we have some core principles and things like not delivering messages, for example. And I think if in an SE conversation where somebody was actively using SE to manipulate somebody's position, to sort of, we see this in the SE review shows. You'll see us calling Mark out if he's making a point lazily, cheaply, in a way that's sort of not really honest.
Leading
we call him out. We laugh at him about it. We say this is, and he will usually be the first to hold his hand up and say, yeah, totally. That was that. Normalizing those attitudes, I think, is what the community does to prevent it from becoming manipulation. I think normalizing
a bad way of manipulation
in a negative sense, yes, absolutely. But I would still argue that manipulation at all is I don't want to manipulate you into reflecting. I want you to get there honestly and in your own terms. And I think that the semantics there, I understand, but I think it's important to.
I call that fallacy. A rooster, not a chicken.
Right. Okay. Fine. Yeah. Sure. But I do think people hear the word manipulation, as we've discussed, and see the negative connotation before they see any other potential interpretation of that word, and therefore, yeah, I would advocate against what I would say was certainly negative manipulation, but I think we can say in the broad sense, manipulation could be defaulted to the negative side before we could acknowledge that there's potentially positive manipulations.
Yeah.
I'm absolutely roasting. I've absolutely loved this conversation. We've also surpassed our 2-hour threshold, so apologies to my guests for that. this has been a brilliant conversation. This is making me feel like we need to be doing. I want to be doing this more often again. Even though it's so damn hot in here. But honestly, chat has been absolutely phenomenal. So thank you to everybody in chat for being absolutely delightful.
Thank you to Kurglo for telling everyone that I'm right.
Apart from that one comment, which Kurglo is never forgiven for. But everybody else has been delightful.
You don't like also, when people speak the truth, do you? Yeah.
Also, that comment from Banana Warrior Princess. Again, she's skirting the banhammer quite egregiously, I think. So thank you, everybody. Honestly, brilliant. Chat's been lovely. Dali, Janosch, thanks for being here as always. Do you have anything you want to plug or push or promote?
I want to plug I want to plug that your next podcast should be on the topic of cults, and are we or not?
Oh yeah, let's rip that band-aid up. Yeah, let's do that. We can do the whole.
I'm kind of scared. Dali will say, "Are we a cult?" Sure. Yeah, we're a cult. Yeah, absolutely. What's wrong with that?
I'm going to take the other position. I'm going to say that we are a low control group, and if we make any errors, it's because we are so many of us come from cults, and we're allergic to it. Like
yes, I've made that comment before. I think there's a sensitivity to these things.
One of us.
Yes, we could. I'd love to do the topic. We could talk about cults all day, and we can go through the bite model. I think several people, in fact, have joined the community and then gone through the bite model. We'll have to get a better panel. You mean less Germans? I agree. I think it's become a problem. It's.
I love being the problem.
That was very well done.
And as to your question, if there's anything I want to plug, and also referring to the question of whether we're a cult, the German community is currently in the we are meeting up next week. Usually we are an online group, but we are now meeting up for the second time in person. And we are starting our own nonprofit in Germany. And I guess that could be seen as a sign of a cult, that there's more organizations popping up everywhere.
A fringe fraction. I like it. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, so if there's any German watchers out there who want to join us, reach out. We're on Discord. And I'm not gonna announce that our first German review show is gonna come out very soon, because I've done that a few times.
Every time I've seen you.
Right. And yeah, it's hopefully soon, but I don't know when exactly. So yeah,
Elon told me it was 2 weeks.
Oh yeah, okay. Well, I gotta get going now. I have some work to do.
Sorry, that was an inside joke, and don't take it seriously.
So good.
That's awesome. Well, I mean, more real world meetups happening again, and more often is definitely a great thing. So yeah, that's awesome to hear. As for myself, I'm going to push tomorrow, Saturday, on the Deviant Robot Discord server. We do every Saturday we have a Deviant Discord discussion group, and we have different topics every week. I really can't remember what the topic was supposed to be this week, but I'm sure it'll be fun. So I do encourage anybody, if you want to join the Deviant Robot Discord group and join the Discord discussions. They're super friendly, and they go on for hours, and they usually ramble, and it's a good fun session. So we do that every Saturday at I think it's, what is it going to be in GMT? I think it's 3 p.m. GMT, whatever that is in your time zone. But yes, feel free to come and join us for that. It'd be lovely to see some new faces. But yes, Dali, Janosch, thank you so much for being here, guys. Really appreciate it. And thank you to everybody in chat. Stay safe, take care, look after yourselves, and enjoy the cool spots that you can find. Bye-bye.
Bye.